Thank you for coming, everybody. As you can see, this is the talk here, and make sure you're in the right spot. It's like when you get on a bus, make sure you're going the right direction. This is who we are. Automate your mobile development ecosystem. I felt kind of bad when I submitted the talk a couple months later, and I looked at that and realized I just made the world's best buzzword bingo sentence. So I want to take a minute and explain what that really means. We had a unique case at our company where we had 200 apps spread across a couple of stores that we had to figure out how to make that work in a reasonable fashion. So what I want to do here is walk you through the troubles we ran into, the fixes we found for those problems, so that way when you get to X number of apps. First question, how many folks here are responsible for at least one app? Just a handful. Anybody responsible for more than 10? Holy cow, 20, 50? What's your number? 20s? Okay, yeah, so we were around 200, and that presented us with some serious problems. This is the agenda, so I'll talk a little bit about who we were and why we did it, the problems we ran into, the solutions. Then looking back with those solutions, there's some success stories that really drove home that all this automation really made a difference. And then I just want to give a couple of key takeaways so that way when you go back and you're sitting down with your teams, you can start to figure out how to solve this problem. Quick view on me and why I'm standing here. This is my roots. So any kid that grew up in the 70s, early 80s will recognize this stuff. I have a pointer here, so this thing, some of you may not know that that's a cassette player. So the first game that I remember playing was on a cassette. It was the coolest thing I'd ever seen, and that set me off in motion towards the direction of computer science, becoming a programmer, and doing everything I've done. The other thing is I was lucky enough to play college football, and when you think of college football, you don't think of software. Well, the one thing that I learned there was Agile. So if you think about how Agile works, you've got a sprint of a certain number of weeks, and then you have to ship something. The same thing was true for us on our team. Every week we had to put a product out there, and it was against another team, and we either won or we lost because of the preparation that we did. So every game week was a sprint for us. Every coach was a product owner. We had to bring all of that work together to deliver a good product so that way we could win and the coaches could keep our jobs and we could keep our scholarships. So that was the first lesson I had in Agile, and that really shaped the direction I went with software. This is my personal mission. When I look at that, I break it down into two pieces. The first thing you have to do to make the craft of software better is find really tough problems and not run from them, but run towards them. This is an example of one of those things. We had a couple hundred apps that were taking us months to ship. It was a unique problem set that not a lot of people had. There weren't any answers for it, so we had to figure it out. And then phase 2 of this mission is sharing that. So giving back to the community that helped us figure those things out. So this talk is one of those points where I'm trying to give back to everything that we learned, and hopefully one of you walks back to your company and makes one less mistake than we did. If that happens, then I'm a happy guy. So who are we? What do we do? Why do we have these 200 apps? We are what I say is an app as a service company. We weren't a custom dev shop. Our primary customer base, as you can guess, because of Ron Burgundy, is local news. So we ran the news apps, news, weather, sports, all kinds of different apps for local news stations across the country. Local news stations are good at producing news. They aren't good at technology. They had honestly just figured out how to do web development well. Mobile was something they knew they needed to have a presence for. That's what our product did for them. They didn't have to do any work in their CMS system. They publish a story, our system picks it up, it's in their mobile apps, and away we go. These are some of the numbers. Granted, we're not on the Netflix scale or anything like that. This talk isn't about the number of page views we had or ads or users or anything like that. It's more about the scale of the apps and the ecosystem that we had to put in place to make that happen. But as you can see, this isn't chump change. So every year we serve 3 billion ads, which that's how we made money, so it was important. Delivered 3 billion stories, videos, pictures. So with that, the big question is, what do you do? Do you do a responsive web app? Do you do a native mobile app? We actually did both. What we found out that was our user retention was higher with mobile apps. Mobile web was what we call the gateway drug. Folks would come in, they would search on their phone, they would search for some news story, find it, you open the article on mobile web, and we had a smart banner at the top that would say, hey, install this. So they would install the apps, and our average user would use our news apps about 90 times each month. So that was the real sticky factor for us. Now, we're not saying that native apps are the right thing for everybody. All right, be careful, think it through. I'm going to talk through why you need to think it through. Walking into a WiseEye Open, if you choose native apps, you've got 3 stores to work with if you're doing the big 2. We didn't mess with Windows Phone. We had one guy that wanted us to do a Windows Phone, and we didn't do it. But when you have these 3 stores, your work is tripled because you have to submit three times. So those are real challenges. It's going to slow you down. You're going to have to put processes in place like we did here to make it a simple process to ship software. Now again, we have those 3 stores times 200 apps. Everything's different. Every app was customizable. So ABC wants their app to look different than Fox, even though they're in the same city. So we had to do a lot of work to build a customizable UI that was configurable for them so that we could make it easy on ourselves and have a single app, but Fox and ABC could run the same app, but you wouldn't know it. So there was a lot of work we had to do to make sure that happened. So that's a bit of our business. I'm going to talk through the problems that we had. Prioritization strategy. Everything that we did led up to this, what I called fear-driven development. We were afraid of our code. We didn't want to change it because testing it was hard. Testing it was weeks. I'm going to cover that a little bit more. Shipping it was weeks. So this drove everything we did. Innovation slowed. We hadn't shipped a new UI in 4 years. Can you imagine using a mobile app that hasn't changed in 4 years? You'd uninstall it, right? Well, naturally, we were having those problems, so we had to solve that problem. But the first thing we had to do was get over this fear. So go back. So I'm going to cover why we had all this fear. This was our testing. And that's really what it looked like. We had a guy that on his desk had like 20 devices and would go through each use case and tap on each phone through that use case and keep doing that. And that's how we did it. And that was okay. As you can imagine, that led to really long testing cycles. And we had these waterfall-style test windows that always got squeezed at the end because it's waterfall and stuff happens when you're building software. So our test windows got shrunk and we never shipped as good a product as we did, so we got scared to ship. Android, I love it to death, but building software for it's really hard because of the fragmentation that's involved with it. So there's 3 different layers of fragmentation that's involved with Android. First and foremost, just the manufacturers, right? Everybody takes Android and they layer their stuff on top of it. So 2.3 for Samsung is different than 2.3 for Motorola because they've layered their own software on top of it. Screen sizes. This is Motorola. I read an article probably 2 years ago where at one point Samsung had 15,000 different screen resolutions for their mobile phones, 15,000. So designing, testing, deploying for all of that, as you can imagine, is very difficult. Fragmentation, layer number 2. Fragmentation, layer number 3, OS version adoption, right? So because those manufacturers have their own layers they put on top of Android, when Android pushes out KitKat, that doesn't mean you can get KitKat. You have to wait for Samsung or HTC or Motorola to do their flavor of KitKat. So that meant we had to support versions all the way back to 2.3 when 4.4 was just pushed out. So that limited what we could do from a usability, from some of the new tools that they had shipped. There were things that would make our code base easier and more simple, but we just couldn't do it because we had to support all the way back to 2.3. So that makes things very difficult. Release engineering, same thing. We had a release engineer when I got there. His name was James, and whenever we needed a build, somebody sent James an email. And I'm talking any build. Hey, we pushed this code in. Can you give me a dev build? Sure, I'll get it. Go and do his thing. Select the target for that customer, because we had 200 targets, so you had to pick the right build. I need a QA build, because we're getting close. James, can you do me a build? Yeah. Okay, we're ready to ship. James, go build this 200 times. And again, it was just like our tester, push button. So he would go in and do everything by hand. The thing that I saw when I got there was this bear was the success that we were having as a company. We were growing. We were at 200 apps. What happened when we got to 1,000 apps? We would just crumble. This bear would gobble us up. So we had to find a way to fix that problem. Design. This is what our design looked like. A couple reasons. One, it was really old. Two, our design was done by iOS developers. So those of you that are Android developers, you've seen apps where they take an iOS design and just shove it in there. And you're like, this isn't how I use an Android app. So we had to relearn how to design things. So this is one of those moments where you kind of go, oh crap, we are screwed. So we got in there, we looked at the code and figuring out how we were going to build a new UI on top of this. And reality hit us, and how is the code this bad? Like, how is it this much of a mess? So I started asking questions about how we got here, and the product was about 8 years old, written exclusively by contractors. And the not invented here syndrome was everywhere. So everything was done differently in every app that we had, because nobody liked what contractor X did before them, so they did it their own way. So we were only consistent in being inconsistent. To make it worse, to multiply the problem, we had that same spaghetti code in our iPhone app, our iPad app. Yeah, we actually had two. For some reason, we thought it was a good idea to have two. For Android, for Kindle, we had 4 separate code bases on the client side. Even worse, we had 4 separate code bases on the server side to serve the content, because one was using JSON, one was XML, one was some proprietary thing that some contractor came up with, so it was impossible. That fear-driven development was driven by the fact that if you want to add a feature to all of your apps, you got to do it in 4 different platforms, 4 different code bases, 4 different times. That means you have to test it 4 different times. So that created a problem. And the funny thing is, I showed this picture to our team, and they're like, yeah, that kind of suits what our source code repository looks like. That's it. So as you can imagine, as a developer or a tester or someone on the team, you end up like this, simply because everything is way harder than it needs to. And like any business, they're pushing like crazy to get something shipped. So this is what we did to our team. This is what we did to our product. We just left things because we were scared. So bugs were there forever, again, because we were scared. Who's that running out the door? What's that? Yes, users, customers, right? So our paying customers got fed up with this, and so did the developers too. We hired a new batch, so we didn't really know. I was new, they were new, we were all excited. So we figured it out and said, what are we going to do about it? So that was the good thing, was we saw the problem, we ran towards it, going back to my mission. But our customers were like, what are you doing to us? You're killing us. So they started to leave. So as you can imagine, that presents a problem. So this is a part of Apollo 13 that I love showing to my teams. If you haven't seen the movie, Apollo 13, the mission is in trouble. There are 3 guys in space. Their filters have broken. These guys are the engineers back on Earth trying to figure out how to fix the filters. And they dumped these pile of parts, and they said, we have to fix this by making that fit into that with only just that. And that was the state that we were in, right? We knew we had a problem. We didn't really know how to fix it, but we could look out there and say, hey, here are some tools. So next is the path of how we started to solve that. Again, trying to get around that bear for our growth to ensure that we're ready when that happens. So we were in North Carolina. One of the beauties of living in North Carolina is you come to a stop sign and you see this, and you're like, where do I go? Because some are north, some are south, some are east, some are west, and it's all the same road. That's how we felt. Again, we knew we had a problem to solve. We weren't exactly sure how to do it. Should we just throw more people at it? Do we just admit defeat and start from scratch? What do we do? We started here. How Google tests software, we treat it like a book club. So we got the book, we read some chapters, we talked about it. rinse and repeat. What that did was that level set us on, hey, how are we going to build a quality product? What are we going to do? What are the patterns and practices? Just the nomenclature. How are we going to make this happen? The other thing was we had to make a corporate change. We knew we needed to automate, but we never automated because we never had time. We never had time because we were afraid to change our code. So we had to, all the way up to the CEO, I had to go to the CEO and say, Brian, you're not getting any new features for 6 months. And he would push back and say, well, we can't do that. And I said, okay, what new features have we built in the past 6 months? So it wasn't an altering of what we were doing, but it was an altering of the mindset of we're knowingly not going to build new features. Because when I got there, we had a 12-person team and we had 16 projects in flight. That's not a good place to be in. So we had to hit the brakes. Step one, CI. I'm guessing everybody knows what CI is, right? This was the first real step for us, just again from a release standpoint that we check code in, stuff builds. Now in mobile, that's a difficult beast, right? It's not like the web or just Java or anything like that, where there's agents that are built to handle iOS and Android. We chose Atlassian and their tool suite. Bamboo is their CI server. We pushed that as hard as we could. We got it kind of, sort of working. We'll cover that in a little bit. Builds. So again, more of a mindset change. We had tools. Yeah, the tools would run as soon as you check in code, but what if you checked in code once a week? Right, so we had to retrain people on, hey, this is just good professional software development. We had to get people to understand, and Nerf darts, they don't call them bullets, they call them darts. Nerf darts is how we enforce things in our office, which made it fun, also a little bit dangerous. I think I was the only one that ever got hit in the eye, which is good. It's always good to hit your boss in the eye. So folks enjoyed that. So again, we had CI, we had people checking in code, no unit tests in mobile. Those of you that are building mobile apps, do you guys do unit tests? Okay. Yes? Okay, good. Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for engaging. So we had problems, we had tools that weren't there. We had to figure those out. Bamboo was simple and easy, but it wasn't flexible. So to get it to work for iOS and Android, it just didn't work. We couldn't get their build agent to run on Macs and all kinds of different problems. So we went to Jenkins. Jenkins, as we began the search for replacing Bamboo, was the de facto mobile CI tool. So we put that in place. It made sense. It was free, which was nice, so we spent a little bit less with Atlassian. But this is Jenkins. This is the best definition of Jenkins I've ever seen. It's an insanely sharp knife. It can do anything and everything that you want, including cut your arm off, right? Because it's very configurable, but with that configuration, you can create a complete mess for yourself. Documentation is lacking, so you have to spend a lot of time on Google trying to figure things out. The other thing, there's all these plugins that are needed to help run your Android builds, your iOS builds. Cool, we got plugins that solves everything. Problem is, your Android plugin needs version 4.3, but your iOS version needs version 5. I don't know the version numbers, but they're disparate versions. All right, so you have all these plugins that solve your problems, but they don't match the version that you're running, so we had to end up drawing a matrix of every plugin that we wanted and the versions of Jenkins that it would run on and find the most appropriate version of Jenkins to install so that we could get the most plugins to help solve our problem. So Jenkins is great, but Jenkins is also painful because you've got to figure out what plugins are most important, rank those, and decide what versions to install across the board. So there is no silver bullet. My solution to getting Jenkins to work is Google and patience. So yes, I put Google and Axl Rose are BFFs. I bet you've never heard that at a conference. So that's my one-liner that I stick with. But that's the only way we found to solve the problems, was just patience and trying to find and keep hacking away on those versions and talking to the plugin developers to see what new versions were coming. Jenkins was more than just CI for us. So we're going to cover in a little bit that we actually did our releases with Jenkins. So we would put everything in there so that way we could do a single push button. It never got to single push button, but we got to at least a couple of button pushes to where it would deploy for us. So it wasn't just CI, it was continuous deployment as well. Yeah, it was hard. It was difficult to get set up, but at the end of the day, it wasn't a person doing it 200 times, right? James doing it 200 times. You do anything 200 times, you're going to mess up. You're not doing it on purpose. You're just a human. Things happen. You get a text from your spouse. You get hungry. You get up. You have a coworker that comes and just says, "Hey, what's up, James?" And you take your eye off it, and something's missed. And now a customer has the wrong version, and everybody's unhappy. So taking the human element out of it helped us produce a better product. The other thing we did is with our branching strategy was we wanted to make sure that we ran the tests as quickly as possible. So our branching strategy over here, so we ran all of our tests on our Epic branches. So it wasn't that, hey, once something's merged into main that we finally run the automation. We ran it on every branch, not every branch, on the main branch below it. So the Epic branch, as we work on our stories, as it's merged into the Epic branch, that's where all our tests ran, so we were good to go. So Jenkins managed all of that. It managed the branching and the creation of the tests and the projects to go along with that. Test automation. Moving on to that. This was a long, hard slog, but we got there. This is exactly how we felt. We knew it was a big mountain, but we knew the only thing we'd do was start walking. This is my favorite picture in the entire set of slides because this is just scary, right? I just imagine this person's fingers getting mangled because it's caught in the duct tape, they hit the drill on high speed, and it's just a complete mess. This is what framework version 1.0 for us looked like. We didn't know what we were doing. We had some general idea of how to solve the problem, and we just went, and we ran, and we created this mess. Calabash was the tool that we ended up using. We looked at Robotium, which is what Google ships, and it just works with Android, but for iOS, it doesn't really help us. We looked at Frank, another tool that worked in a similar way. With Calabash, it got us most of the way there, right? We had this ideal situation of we want to write the test once and have it run on both platforms. Nobody really did that. So we had to build our own. So we extended Calabash a couple different ways. We wanted to open source it. The team exploded before we could make that happen and give back to say, hey, with this tool, you can write your tests once, and it will run on iOS and Android and Amazon, and you'll be fine, because we didn't want to maintain tests in two spots. It doesn't mean everything's perfect, right? So yay, we have this automation, we write it once, it runs on both platforms, everything's perfect. No. We then had 3 different languages that we had to do, right? So we had to add labels for Objective-C and Java on the devices themselves. Then we had to write the tests in Ruby, right? So the test framework was in Ruby for Calabash. Then Cucumber's language, because Cucumber was the other thing that we did on the back end to drive all of that, so we could have a Gherkin-style test. Those were 3 different languages. So every time we wanted to add a test, it was 3 different spots, 3 different languages that we had to go and write that. We never conquered that, but it was good enough for us. So even though you get there, even though you get Calabash up and running, adding a test is still difficult. Whenever you add a new form, whenever you add a new control, you've got these 3 different layers to go and add it. Not perfect, but better. Submission process. 3-headed dog. I think the dog was Fluffy in Harry Potter, if anybody remembers. I think the dog was Fluffy. So we have the 3 stores. We have iTunes, Google Play, Amazon. Submitting for those 3 completely different things. They all behave a little bit differently. They all have different requirements. They all do it in their own fun way. And naturally, there's no API. They don't make it simple. They don't want to help you out. Why don't they do that? So we actually have a rep with Apple that we spent too much time with, and his argument for why there was no API and why there never was going to be an API was that they were afraid of the clone army, which I call BS on, because how many Flappy Bird clones are out there, right? We've all seen Flappy Bird and Floppy Bird and who knows what else. But our apps were all kind of the same, so they wanted to restrict us from doing that, so they never built an API. I've heard that Google has an API. Android developer that we had on our team I'm still in touch with, and he said there's an API that's coming out. So there's hope. So our solution, as painful as it is to say, it was just classic brute force. Selenium, right? We just drove the web UI. It worked. It did the job. It got it done. Again, it wasn't a human doing it. It wasn't James doing it 600 times, right? Anyone doing any job 600 times is going to bork one of them, right? So now James could push a button 3 different times. It would run. You still have to keep an eye on it. And we were at an Agile shop. One of our developers made me put this in here because he was like, you're singing the praises of this thing like it's the greatest ever. Because it was brute force, because it was Selenium, it would break often. So we got to the point where we would run the automation every night just to find the breaks, because we would go and do a release. We wanted to ship once every month. We'd do a release, we'd hit the button at night, walk away, and it failed on the first one because they moved a control, they added a new requirement, there's a new checkbox there that we didn't know about. So you have to stay on top of this. If you do this automation, and if you get above 20 apps, for those of you in the back with 20 apps, I would seriously look at this. It's going to be fragile. But even though it's fragile, it's still well worth it because the time you save and the quality of your shipments is going to be that much better. Ideally, API would be there. Google, I think, is getting there. There's hope. This is like the dream that we can just push a button and APIs will take care of it. It's not there yet. I think we're going to get there in a few years from the things I've been hearing. So hang in there. It's going to get better. So a couple success stories. iOS 7 came out. iOS users out there, did any of you have any problems when iOS 7 came out? I see a couple nods. One of the problems we had was video. We hadn't yet figured out how to automate our video player testing. And when you go to News app, there's lots of videos in there. They had a few undocumented changes that broke everything that we were doing. So when iOS 7 came out, and adoption for iOS is very fast, it's very good, which is helpful. It's a lot better than Android and the fragmentation we talked about. But we had this problem real soon, real fast. The good news is that we were able to identify the fix. Our automation didn't really help with that. But we could get the fix validated and submitted to all of our apps on iOS in less than 24 hours. Before we did all this work, it would have been at least a 2-week process to go through that. But this automation saved our butts, and our customers were way happier because we fixed the problem right away. Quality was a big issue. We talked about the fear-driven development, and we were just afraid of our code. As we went through these monthly release cycles, one thing that we noticed was the first one that we did, we had like 5 crashes in the first 5 minutes of our final run of testing. And then towards the end, it was the 14th. We always shipped on the 15th. So I asked the team, hey, are we good to go? They said, yeah, we're good to go. The tests are green. What else do we need to do? So we'd evolved from that point where we were afraid and we had crashes as soon as we were ready to go to the automation ran, it's green, we trusted it. So that's the ultimate point that you want to get to. We got there, made our lives a lot better. I talked about the monthly release cycle. In my view, this is the one time in my life that 1 has been greater than 6, because our release cycle was 6 months before we got all this in place. We got it down to 1. We got more sleep. Our spouses were happier because we saw them. So who were our kids? Our kids were happier because we saw them. Our customers were happier. We actually released new features. We hadn't done that in years. So everybody was in a much better spot. At the end of the day, we had no fear. We were shipping much faster. So key takeaways for those of you that are in this game. Don't wait. This is the papal inauguration. I'm not sure what the official term is for the pope when there's a new pope. But this is the difference in 2005 and 2013. Mobile devices are everywhere. If mobile devices aren't a part of your technology department, they will be soon. Everybody that I talk to either has them in place or says, yeah, we're getting there soon. So don't wait until you have 5 apps before you start thinking about automation, both around testing and submission, because it'll be too late. Right? You don't want to be that guy that, we can't really scale. We can't do that acquisition because it takes us too long. So start the process now. Start investigating it now. Start learning everything out there. Learn about Calabash. Study up on everything. Learn about the app stores and how they work. Start small. We did not start small a couple times. We create that's spaghetti code. As much as we point fingers and laugh about how bad the code was, we did the same thing to ourselves. We did it with Jira. We had a project for every layer of the app. The same thing in Confluence. We just had spaces everywhere. We just confused the crap out of ourselves. Our branching model, I showed a branching model. It was like 3 layers. At one point, we had like 6 layers, and we argued about it for 2 months, right? So be lean, start small, try things, take baby steps. Don't jump in like we did and make a million mistakes. And try things. I'm a Mythbusters guy. I got to meet them. They're really cool guys. They really do bring this. Another video that I show my teams is a failure reel that they have where they talk about failure being important because you learn. So don't sit back like our company did before we got there and just say, yep, we got to test it by hand. That's just kind of how it is. We're going to deal with it. If we need to grow, we'll hire another 5 testers or we'll hire 5 more versions of James. Don't do that. It can get better, but the only way it's going to get better is if you try, right? We had that willingness to try and mess up, stub our toe, put Bamboo in, realize it was the wrong choice, move to Jenkins, cut our arm off a couple times, and then find the right version of all the plugins and of Jenkins itself to get it working. Okay. Questions? Okay. He was first, so we'll let him go. So we had separate Selenium approaches for each app store, if that's what you're asking. So the question was slicing and dicing around Selenium specifically. Right, so for Calabash was our main testing tool for the devices themselves, for on-device. We had to do significant work in the Calabash extension that we wrote to be able to have the touch events be handled appropriately, for Android especially, from 2.3 to 4.4. So we had special code in there that would validate based on what version it was, because with every OS update, there would be different methods and things like that that we had to figure out. So that was just a trial and error. That was one of those things where we had to just keep chugging and find a way. Yeah, we had green check marks and everything. So it was a nice matrix of everything. So, yep. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean this in the right way.
Oh, this is going to be good.
Yeah. So, because I'm at Johns Hopkins, I'm involved in some projects, and I'm struggling with this issue of web-based versus me. Mm-hmm. So, why didn't you just go web-based apps?
Sure.
Because they, I know the performance differences, but is that really an issue? I looked at your website, it looks like you're doing a video, news feeds, that sort of thing. It looks like it could be web-based at a simplified level. But I want to know why, because it might be helpful in ours.
Sure. So one of the things that we wanted to do was provide specific functionality for each OS. Our moneymaker was ads. Ad delivery in mobile web is a lot simpler. And by simpler, it means you can't use some of the annoying formats that everybody hates, right? But that's how we made money. So the key driver for us was the integration with all of our third parties that delivered ads for us. They all had an SDK that allowed us to do rich media ads or video ads, things like that. Mobile web, we couldn't support that. So that was a key driver for us and why we did that. Yes, performance better, we all know that. It allowed us to do some things a little bit better and help the user experience. But at the end of the day, the key driver for us was ads, because that was our revenue. And to maximize the revenue per user, we had to have those SDKs in there to give us the extended ad units that we wanted to be able to make the money that we needed to stay in business for not as long as we would like. Yes, sir. So the question is, did we add new features to iOS and Android at the same time? We did, yes, we did. We were one big Scrum team. We all worked together, and our customers were pretty adamant, and we pushed back on this a little bit, but they said they wanted the features at the same time in the same app. We actually had to submit iOS first, because if you haven't done apps, with Apple, there's a delay. They have a review, and they are serious about their review. We've had stuff rejected because of different things we didn't comply with. We didn't even know we weren't compliant, but it was rejected. So we would submit the iOS apps, and as soon as the first one of those apps started being approved and put in the store, then we would submit Google, because Google, as soon as you submit it, it's live in about an hour or two. Amazon, we did at the end. We didn't have a whole lot of users, but that was kind of a legacy thing. So we did them at the same time because our customers want it. And so that's what we had to move to. We had to release everything at the same time because that's what our customers wanted. So it helped. We were a small team, so it made it pretty simple. Yeah. So the question is how to decide when to stop supporting a version. We had stats. We used Google Analytics, and we could just look at our users and see the versions. So we usually, once a version got below 5%, that's when our sales and marketing team was like, okay, you can cut it. We wanted to cut it like as soon as we showed a downward trend. We wanted to get it out because we knew that that would let us use more of the feature of the new OSs that would make our lives better. But sales and marketing, because we needed to sell, we needed to make our customers happy, didn't want to say to our customers, hey, you're going to lose 20% of your users. Now, the struggle is you're not going to lose them. They're just not going to get the new versions of your app. They're only going to get the versions of the app that they support. So you don't lose them, but they don't get the new shiny stuff. Now, the argument that we made was, well, if they're on that old version, are they really concerned about new shiny stuff? So does it really matter? So that was the argument that we made. We never won it. We kept pushing back of we need to drop this faster and faster and faster just because we were getting back to that weight of doing development was so heavy because we had to support all of these old versions. Yes, sir. Sure. Yeah, so we had recurring overhead, and we actually tracked that. One of the things that we did was for every release, we had an epic in Jira, and we had points on it. We started at about, I think, 35 points per release. And we averaged about 100 points per sprint. So it took us about a third of the team every sprint to ship everything. We kept working on getting that lower, but we felt in the end it gave us the best chance to actually get something shipped. Because the more you do things, the better you get at them, right? If you want to get better at golf, you go play golf more. So if we want to get better at shipping, we had to ship more. If we did it less often, we never would have really gotten better at it. So that was our approach to get as optimal as possible. So it was less about the customers and more about us not wearing our developers down to the bones, right? And having all those bugs and to where we don't ship anything. So, no, we had 2-week sprints and we shipped on the 15th. So we just knew for that sprint that we were planning, okay, there's a 15th here, so we need to set aside 30x points for that and then start working backwards and filling the rest of that sprint. So, anyone else? No? Okay, if you need to get in touch with me, Twitter's probably your best bet. That's me personally. That's a podcast I'm a part of, so reach out. I'd be happy to answer any questions. I'll be around. If you have any questions as you think about it and want to just talk longer about stuff, I'd be happy to answer them. So thank you for coming.